Have you ever wondered what makes a contract legally binding? Let's dive into the captivating world of contracts, shall we? A contract, in its simplest form, is a promise or set of promises that are legally enforceable. It's an agreement between two or more parties that creates mutual, legal obligations. And let's face it, we encounter contracts almost every day, whether we realize it or not. Think about it. You're hiring a new employee, you sign an employment contract, you're renting an apartment, you sign a lease, you're a budding musician signing your first recording deal, you guessed it, that's a contract too. These are all examples of how contracts are a fundamental part of our personal and business lives. But why are contracts so important? Well, they provide clarity for all parties involved. They outline what is expected from each party, the benefits they will receive, and the consequences if the agreement is broken. Essentially, they bring order to our often chaotic world. Let's talk about different types of contracts for a moment. First, we have a recording deal. This is an agreement between an artist and a record company where the company agrees to record, promote, and distribute the artist's music. Next, we have an employment contract. This is an agreement between an employer and an employee that outlines the terms of employment, including job responsibilities, salary, and benefits. And lastly, let's consider a lease. This is a contract where a property owner allows a tenant to use their property in exchange for rent. The lease outlines the terms of this arrangement, including the length of the lease and the amount of rent to be paid. Understanding these contracts and what makes them legally binding is crucial. It helps us navigate the complexities of our personal and professional lives with confidence. So buckle up and get ready to delve deeper into the fascinating world of contracts. Knowing what makes a contract legally binding can save you from potential pitfalls in the future. So, stay tuned as we unravel the intricacies of contracts in the following scenes. So, what are the key ingredients that make a contract legally binding? Well, there are 5 main elements that come together to create a robust, enforceable contract. Let's break them down. First, we have the offer. Think of it as a promise to do or not to do something. For instance, a recording company might offer a musician a deal to produce an album. That's an offer. Next, we have acceptance. This is a clear, unequivocal yes to the offer. If the musician agrees to the terms of the recording deal and signs on the dotted line, that's acceptance. Then comes consideration. This is what each party gets in return for fulfilling their part of the contract. The musician, for instance, gets financial compensation, and the recording company gets the rights to the album. Both parties benefit, and that's consideration. Fourthly, there's the intention to create legal relations. This simply means that both parties intend for the contract to be legally binding. If our musician and recording company didn't intend for their agreement to be enforceable by law, it wouldn't be a contract. Finally, we have certainty of terms. This means that the terms of the contract must be clear and definite. If the recording deal says the musician will produce an album but doesn't specify how many songs should be on it, that lack of certainty could cause problems down the line. Now, let's take another example. Let's say you're renting an apartment. The landlord's offer is the lease agreement, your acceptance is signing that lease, and the consideration is the rent you pay and the apartment you get to live in. Both parties intend for the lease to be legally binding, and the terms, like how much rent is and when it's due, are certain. So there you have it. Offer, acceptance, consideration, intention to create legal relations, and certainty of terms. These are the 5 key elements that make a contract legally binding. Understanding these elements can help you ensure that your agreements are legally enforceable. Let's delve into some real-life examples of contracts. One common type of contract that many of us might be familiar with is a recording deal. This is an agreement between a recording artist and a record label. The artist agrees to record music that the label will then own and distribute. In return, the artist gets a percentage of the profits, known as royalties. This contract meets the essential elements. There's an offer, the record label's proposal to distribute the artist's music. Acceptance, the artist agrees to record. Consideration, the royalties. And mutual consent, both parties understand and agree to the terms. Next, let's talk about employment contracts. When you start a new job, you're often asked to sign an employment contract. This agreement outlines your job responsibilities, salary, benefits, and grounds for termination. It's a legally binding document that protects both you and your employer. Just like the recording deal, it has an offer, the job position. Acceptance, you agree to take the job. Consideration, your salary and benefits. and mutual consent, you understand and agree to the terms. Lastly, let's discuss leases. A lease is a contract between a landlord and a tenant. The landlord offers the property for rent, and the tenant agrees to pay a certain amount each month. The lease outlines the length of the agreement, the amount of rent, and the responsibilities of both parties. Once again, we see the essential elements of a contract: an offer, the rental property; acceptance, the tenant agrees to rent; consideration, the rent; and mutual consent. Both parties agree to the terms. These examples show that contracts are a part of our everyday life, and understanding them can be beneficial. Whether you're signing a recording deal, accepting a new job, or renting a property, you're entering into a contract. By understanding what makes these agreements legally binding, you can ensure that your interests are protected and that you're making informed decisions. There are many more types of contracts out there. Let's explore some of them. First off, we have verbal and nonverbal contracts. A verbal contract is exactly as it sounds, an agreement made verbally. For instance, if you're at a coffee shop and you order a latte, you've just entered into a verbal contract. You agree to pay, and they agree to make your coffee. Nonverbal contracts, on the other hand, are typically written but can also be signified through actions. Silent auctions are a great example of this. You write down your bid, and if it's the highest, you've just entered into a nonverbal contract to buy the item. Next, we have null and void contracts. These are contracts that are not legally enforceable due to some form of illegality or immorality. For instance, if two parties enter into a contract to rob a bank, that contract is null and void because the agreement is illegal. Then there's the boilerplate contract. This is a standard contract that uses generic terms and conditions, often seen in software licenses or online terms of service. They're called boilerplate because, like the steel used to make boilers, they're intended to be used in a wide variety of situations. A handshake deal is a type of informal agreement that, while not written, is still legally binding. It relies heavily on the honor and integrity of the parties involved. For example, two farmers might agree on the price of a cow with a simple handshake. The term fine print refers to the small text in contracts that often contains important information. It's called fine print because it's typically printed smaller to fit more text, like disclaimers or limitations, into a contract. It's always important to read the fine print before signing anything. Lastly, we have pre-incorporation contracts. These are agreements made by individuals who intend to form a corporation. For instance, they might enter into an agreement with a landlord to lease office space for their future company. Knowing these types of contracts can help you navigate the complex world of agreements and obligations. Contracts are an essential part of our life, whether we realize it or not. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've discovered today. We've delved deep into the world of contracts, unraveling their complexity and highlighting their importance in our everyday lives. We started by defining what a contract is: a legally binding agreement between two or more parties, each of whom has obligations to fulfill. It's not just a piece of paper, but a crucial tool that helps maintain order and predictability in our interactions, be it business or personal. Then we explored the essential elements that make a contract legally binding. There's an offer and acceptance, consideration, the intention to create legal relations, and the capacity of the parties involved. Each component has a role to play, and missing any one of them could render the contract null and void. Through various examples, we saw how contracts come to life. They're not abstract concepts, but tangible agreements we encounter daily. We discussed a recording deal, where an artist signs with a record label, an employment contract that lays out the terms of a job, and a lease agreement that sets the rules for a rented property. Each example highlighted how contracts help establish clear expectations and protect the rights of all parties involved. Delving further, we explored more types of contracts like verbal and nonverbal agreements, pre-incorporation contracts, and handshake deals. We decoded the fine print and boilerplate clauses, which often seem intimidating, but are crucial to understanding the full scope of an agreement. Finally, we addressed some complex terms like null and void, a contract that is legally invalid, and boilerplate, standard clauses included in most contracts. In conclusion, contracts are more than just formal agreements. They're the backbone of our societal transactions, providing structure, clarity, and protection. Understanding contracts can empower you to make better decisions and protect your rights. Stay informed and always remember to read before you sign.